Welcome back. So we are still on types of statements. So we are going back to the absolute statement of fact. And that's our next type of statement to discuss, the absolute statement of fact. Now, when we say a statement is an absolute statement, now this statement is an airtight statement. Now, what does it mean for a statement to be an airtight statement? This is the statement that does not give room for exception. I don't know. It does not give room for what? Exception. Which means that we also call it a sweeping statement. This is also called a sweeping statement. Now, in this regard, how do we understand this absolute statement? An absolute statement is that statement that does not give room for exception. It does not give room for addition. It does not give room for subtraction. And it has pointers. Some of the pointers we have totally pointers of the absolute statement of fact are totally, wholly, entirely, etc. Now, these are some of the pointers, all. Before I put etc, it's very important, all, then etc. Now, these are pointers that shows that a statement is absolute. Now, once a writer uses this kind of statement, now, irrespective of your opinion about it, whether you agree with it or you do not agree with it, it is not needed. What the writer has stated remains a fact, an absolute fact to the statement. So under absolute statement of fact, the writer uses pointers like totally, like wholly, like the entirely, like all to explain his point. Now look at this example. There has been an upsurge in the activities of secret courts in Nigerian universities lately. A recent report has it that all male students, look at it now, all male students of Nigerian universities are secret court members. This has been a thorn in the flesh of lecturers who are compelled to award marks to some leaders of the court or be sent to their untimely graves. And I said we should pick the most appropriate. Some male undergraduates are secret court members. Many male undergraduates are secret court member. Most male undergraduates are secret court member. All male undergraduates are secret court member. The examiner explicitly told us that all male, all are secret court member. All male students are secret court member. So this pointer here does not give room for what? Exception. It does not give room for exception. So if you have a brother in the Nigerian university, according to the passage, he's a secret court member. Do you understand it now? So if you're a student in the Nigerian university, according to the passage, you're a secret court member. Why? Because it does not give room to exempt anyone. It's an airtight statement. So when I say pick the most appropriate, our answer is what? Option what? D. All male undergraduates are secret court members. Now, let's now look at the non-absolute statement of fact. Now, the non-absolute statement of fact is that statement that gives room for exception. Now, why do I say it's a statement that gives room for exception? It gives room for either addition or subtraction. It is different from the absolute statement. Now, this statement gives room for what? Exception. And it is not an airtight statement. Are we there now? Why? Because it gives room for what? Exception. It gives room for exception. Now let me give you these two statements to buttress my point before I will write some other things about the non-absolute statement. If I say all Igbo men are traders. Look at this. All Igbo men are traders. And I say Igbo men are traders. Now let's look at this statement now. First is all Igbo men are traders. Then Igbo men are traders. Now from the first one here, all Igbo men. or every Igbo man. Now, first thing here is that what? This is an absolute statement. Now, why do we call it an absolute statement? Because of the pointer all. So, are you an Igbo man? If yes, then you are a trader. Even if you're a medical doctor, according to this particular statement that did not give room for exception, he has regarded you as a trader. Look at the other statement now. Igbo men are traders. Now, this one gives room for exceptions. Why? Because there is no pointer to show that it is absolute. So this is non-absolute. So now, what is the easiest way to differentiate between an absolute statement from a non-absolute? One, it is the pointer of the absolute statement. Once you see a pointer all, every, totally, the entire, this pointer shows that there is no room for exception and it is an absolute statement. Once you do not see the pointer, you cannot treat it as what? Absolute. You treat it as what? Non-absolute. So in this regard, let's look at this question now. There is no vice that belittles a person like prostitution. Yet there is no business that is thriving like prostitution today. One thing that a good number of ladies go into prostitution because of economic frustration. Why this may be true in some cases, it is also untrue in some other cases because it is not uncommon to find children of multimillionaires who are prostitutes. The most bitter part of it all is that our female undergraduates are prostitutes. Look at the point of the examiner. Our female undergraduates are prostitutes. Now, from the word "our female," is it an absolute statement or a non-absolute statement? That is the first thing you have to decide. If you see this pointer under an examination condition, what do you do? First is ask yourself, the pointer the examiner has used, is it absolute or non-absolute? Once you have been able to decipher that, then getting the answer becomes a bit easy. Now from here, our female undergraduates are prostitutes. Now here, this is a non-absolute statement. Now, do you know why it's a non-absolute statement? It's non-absolute because the examiner did not use pointer like all, like every, like the entire, like totally. Now, once the examiner did not use these pointers, which suggest absolute statement, it is wrong to treat the statement as what? Absolute. So in this regard, this statement falls is what? A non-absolute statement. Why? Because it gives room for exceptions. So in this regard, let's look at option A. Some female undergraduates are prostitutes. Many female undergraduates are prostitutes. Most female undergraduates are prostitutes. All female undergraduates are prostitutes. Option D is wrong. First, because of the word all. That all shows it is what? Absolute. And our answer is what? C. Most female undergraduates are prostitutes. Quickly, let's look at the absolute deduction. Now, please, if you have not paid attention to any of our lesson, pay attention to this particular statement. Now, what are we looking at now? The absolute deduction. The absolute deduction, this is an error. This is an error. This is an error made by the student when given a statement to interpret. This is an error made by students when given a statement to interpret. Now, it means that when given an absolute statement to interpret, the student gives it a non-absolute interpretation and gives it a non-absolute interpretation and vice versa. Now let me take my time to explain this. Now, what are we saying under the absolute deduction? Absolute deduction is an error whereby a student naturally makes. Now, the examiner will give you a statement to interpret. The examiner might give you an absolute statement to interpret. You now give it an interpretation that is non-absolute. What have you made? You have made an error called the absolute deduction. And the examiner might also give you a non-absolute statement to interpret. And you give it an interpretation that is absolute. you have also made an absolute deduction. So for you to actually understand what the absolute deduction is all about, you actually need to understand what we refer to as an absolute statement and also differentiate it from the non-absolute statement. Absolute statement do not give room for exception. Non-absolute statement gives room for exception. If an examiner gives you a statement to interpret, and the statement he has given to you to interpret is that statement that does not give room for exception, which is the absolute statement, and you give it an interpretation that requires exception, you have made an error, which is called the absolute deduction. So in this regard, first thing note that we have what they call absolute statement. Absolute statement. Absolute statement. We also have non-absolute statement. Now, differentiate between these two. The error being made when you are given an absolute to interpret, instead of you giving it an interpretation that is absolute, you give it an interpretation that is non-absolute, is what we call an absolute deduction. An absolute deduction. So take note of this error being made. It is very pertinent and very important. Now, if we could call something from our passage, it is not unusual for about 1/4 of the volume of an average daily to be constituted of obituaries and a memoriam alone. One possible explanation for this, it has been argued, is that Nigerians value their dead greatly. Look at the statement the examiner has given to you. Nigerians value their dead greatly. Now, the examiner expects you to interpret this statement. Nigerians value their dead greatly. Before we come straight to the option, let's start by interpreting this particular statement by determining, is it an absolute statement or a non-absolute statement? That is the first point. Now, this statement first is what? A non-absolute statement. Why is it non-absolute? Because it does not have pointers that denote an absolute statement. And we have pointers that denote absolute statement. What are those pointers? All, every, totally, wholly, the entire. Once you do not see these pointers being attached to any of the statements, it is wrong to interpret the statement to be what? Absolute. So in this regard, Nigerians value their dead greatly. First is that this statement is what? A non-absolute statement. And because it is a non-absolute statement, what do? If you give it an interpretation that suggests it is absolute, then you have made an error called the absolute deduction. So first is, it is not an absolute statement. So this statement gives room for exception. So by we saying Nigerians value their dead, if the examiner has given you and said, all Nigerians value their dead greatly, in that regard, that statement becomes what? Absolute. But because it has excluded that pointer that denotes absolute statement, this statement is what? Non-absolute. So when I said Nigerians value their dead greatly, suggests, what does it suggest? A, most Nigerians value their dead greatly. Every Nigerians value their dead greatly. All Nigerians value their dead greatly. Some Nigerians value their dead greatly. First is there are two options to be eliminated. What are those options that should be eliminated? Those options that denote absolute. What are they? Every denote absolute. All denote what? Absolute. So these two options, they are wrong. Why? Because the options, what we have been given is a non-absolute statement. And the answer is what? Most Nigerians value their dead greatly. Now that brings us to the non-factual statement. From the word non-factual statement, this is a statement that has no fact in it. This is a statement that has no fact in it. So which means there is no fact in the statement. So in this regard now, for you to actually get this, in most cases, these are figurative or idiomatic statements. Or statements of proverbs, adage, or treason. Now, in this statement now, the meaning to be given to the statement, you have to look at either the word that precedes the statement or the word that comes after the statement. So which means you are trying to just understand the statement, because most cases they are figurative expressions. So there is no fact explicitly stated. You cannot say because the writer has said this, then there must be a fact in the statement. If I say this mutualist stylistic, the study of the act of eulogizing the dead and making their loss sound so heartbreaking, is one of the commodities we can export to other countries. Look at the word commodities. Now, from these commodities here, does it mean that there is a buying and selling? No. The meaning of commodities in this context is different from the actual meaning of commodities. So in this regard, we have said this is a non-factual statement. Now, we now have the double negative statement. The double negative statement. Now, for us to say we have a double negative statement, this is when you have combination of two negative that makes a particular meaning of the word to become what? Positive. If I have, it is not uncommon, it means it is what? Common. I am not ungrateful, it means I am what? Grateful. This is not bad. This is not is negative. Bad is negative. It shows it is what? Pretty, which is what? Positive. So once you have two negative, the outcome of two negative statements in a sentence denotes a positive outcome. Lastly, we are to discuss the conditional statement. Now, under conditional statement, this is when a condition is placed before a particular thing happens. And two things you must note under conditional statement is that a positive conditional statement carries a negative meaning. And a negative conditional statement carries a positive meaning. This you can't find anywhere. Take note of this. We said positive conditional statement carries a negative meaning, and while negative conditional statement carries a positive meaning. So in this regard, you must understand some pointers that show that the statement is conditional. Pointers like if. So if I will always play with this as an example. If you meet a young girl and say, young girl, a damsel, pretty damsel, will you marry me? And she says, I will marry you if you have a car and a house. So which means there's a condition for her marrying you. What's that condition? A house and a car. So which means once you do not meet that condition, there is no marriage. So in most cases, once they give you a condition, there are pointers that denote that this is what? Conditional. Let's take a good example. We now have 3 men entered the Okoli's room and offered him a bag. Opening it, he saw bundles of 500 currency notes. Had he rejected the money, he would not have been arrested. Look at it now. Had he rejected the money. So which means there's a condition. Now, I told you something that a positive conditional statement carries a negative meaning, and a negative conditional statement, a positive conditional statement carries a negative meaning, and a negative conditional statement carries a positive meaning. So we now have 3 men entered the Okoli's room and offered him a bag. Opening it, he saw bundles of 500 currency notes. Had he rejected the money, he would not have been arrested. Now, this statement, had he rejected the money, what does it mean? It means he did not reject the money, therefore he was what? Arrested. Let's look at option A. Okoli rejected the money and was arrested. Is that true? No, it's not true. He did not reject the money. B. Okoli was arrested for rejecting the money. Is that true? No. C. Okoli did not reject the money, so he was arrested. That's the answer. Okoli rejected the money, so he was not arrested. That's not true. So look at it now. Had he rejected the money? So that is the first thing you have to interpret before coming down to the meaning of the statement. Had he rejected the money, which means he did not reject the money. And the basis for him not rejecting the money was the condition for him being arrested. So a positive conditional statement carries a negative meaning, and a negative conditional statement carries a positive meaning. Don't forget this. You can't buy it anywhere. Now look at this example. If my mother had traveled, I would have starved. If my mother had traveled, interpret that statement first. Did your mother travel? If my mother had traveled, I would have starved. So the first point here is that what? Let's interpret that first statement. If my mother had traveled. So it means that what? My mother did not travel. Therefore, I did not starve. That's the expression. So the expression is the same as what? Had my mother traveled, I would have starved. But the meaning to be given to it means that what? You did not starve because your mother did not travel. So have these two things at the back of your mind, that if we have a negative conditional statement, the meaning is always positive, and a positive conditional statement, the meaning is always what? Negative. Now this brings us to the end of today's lesson. See you in our next lesson.